Hello and welcome to the second event of the UK-HRI Expert Seminar Series on methods and best practices in human-robot interaction research. I'm Claire Asher and I'm a freelance science communicator and host of the Robot Talk podcast. And I'm delighted to be your host for today's seminar. We'd like this to be a really friendly, welcoming environment. So I can see lots of you saying hello in the chat already. Please keep that up and maybe let us know where you're watching from today. So today we're very lucky to be joined by Professor Kerstin Dautenhahn from the University of Waterloo, who's going to be talking about applications of social robots in therapy, education and well-being. Before I give the floor to Kerstin for her talk, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Patrick Holthouse, who leads the UK-HRI topic group, to give a brief overview of what the group is all about. So over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Claire, and welcome everybody to our second seminar. I just wanted to quickly mention our UK-HRI topic group initiative, which is a funded project from the UK RAS network, led by University of Hertfordshire with me, and we have Waterloo University with Daniel Hernandez Garcia in there as a co-lead, and also Patricia Shaw from Aberystwyth University. And in our topic group, what we want to do is we want to discuss, develop, and disseminate best practices in HRI research, with a specific focus on emerging researchers and newcomers in the field. For that, we try to also map a little bit of the activities that we do in the UK in terms of HRI research. So we have on our website, for example, a nice little map where you can see different labs and click on them and see some of the people that are engaged in this initiative. If you want to also contact us and come together in this group of friendly researchers, you can come on our website, UK-HRI.org. You can join our Discord community, and also we have a LinkedIn page that you could give a follow, please. That would be much appreciated to grow the group and also to reach a few more people that might be benefiting from the help that we give out. So one of the big things that we do is we have formed an advisory and mentoring committee where we have right now 23, 24 advisors that are happy to engage in mentorship relationships with emerging researchers. We have now 4 mentorships going on. So if you want to benefit from the mentoring, or if you want to become a mentor, then please come and get in touch with us. Otherwise, there's another stream of engagement with us is the research experience grants, where we hand out to UK-based researchers, 1 week long subsistence and travel at foreign institutions in the UK. So say you are in the lab in Aberystwyth and you want to come to Hertfordshire, then we could help you as an emerging researcher to do an experiment, to observe an experiment, to help out with a HRI experimentation at the host institution. For all the details how that works, please go to our website and also come in touch with us. We can help you certainly if you're interested in these kind of things. Also, if you're at HRI conference in Edinburgh this year, feel free to meet up. We are certainly happy to talk about all the initiatives and how we can engage in a more and growing community in HRI in the UK. Thank you very much. That is from my side. Then now please let's welcome Kerstin. I'm looking forward to her talk very much. So the floor is yours, Kerstin.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. So thank you for this great opportunity here to give a presentation today. So I'm Canada Research Chair in Socially Intelligent Robotics here at University of Waterloo, which is not Waterloo in Belgium, but it's Waterloo in Canada. And the province where we are based is in Ontario, which is basically more than 4 times as big as the whole of the UK, but the whole of Canada has a very, much smaller population. So I moved here in 2018. So from a relatively small island with many people to a really big country with a lot of people. And I'm still here and I enjoy it very much. So in this community, you probably know very well what robots are, or social robots in particular, in the sense of they operate in human environments, often alongside people or in collaboration with people, and communicate through a variety of verbal, nonverbal, or affective modalities. So I just want to show you a certain overview video in terms of the kind of research topics that I'm interested in. So I showed this video to illustrate that in addition to very basic research questions and themes that I'm very interested in social robotics and human-robot interaction, I'm also very interested in a variety of application areas. And I want to very briefly also show you some of the research that we are doing in terms of the particular approaches with a focus on co-design. But let me first start with the notion of robots coming in all shapes and sizes. And as it happens at the moment, I'm teaching a course here in Waterloo on embodied intelligence, where we talk a lot about particular physical properties of embodiment and what this means. So I like to start with very brief reflections or maybe food for thought on the three themes: affordances, design, and the concept of Umwelt. So affordances is a relational property. It's between particular designs or objects, features of the environment, and how we and or other creatures interact with it. So for example, a chair affords us to sit on. But again, it's a relational property. It's not a property of the object itself, so whether it's a chair or a robot, but it's about the action possibilities. And so for different creatures, like cats, for example, objects that we use for very particular purposes have very different affordances. There are also fundamental design differences between how living organisms, how creatures are developing, and how machines develop. And that goes back to a notion that Jakob von Uexküll years ago put forward in terms of saying that living systems are developing centrifugally, so the whole comes first and then it grows its own parts, as opposed to machines. Here illustrating a bicycle, it could be a robot where the parts come first and you then put them together in a certain way that builds the whole. And so this is what Jakob von Uexküll called the principal difference between the construction of a mechanism and a living organism. Another very important concept that he put forward is the concept of Umwelt, or the perceptual, experiential worlds of creatures. So in the sense that so the Umwelt is an experiential world around the agent as the subject, with its own sensorium, meaning its sensors, modalities, and motorium, meaning the effectors, motors, actuators, whatever the agent has. So what does it mean for robots? When working with robots and or designing robots and or choosing a robot that you would want to use for a particular experiment or for a particular application, it's important to really think of what is the robot's Umwelt, what are its sensing and acting abilities. What world can the robot perceive, which is different from what we are perceiving? So many animals, for example, have an Umwelt that's very different from what we as humans can perceive and experience. Bees can, for example, detect ultraviolet. Birds, bats use echolocation, so they use ultrasound. We have electric fish who can perceive electric fields and so on. But I would like to encourage you to also think about what the Umwelt of a robot should look like. So, and for these reasons, there is a good argument why we need different types of robots. Sometimes people ask me, oh, is there a perfect social robot that you could use for all of your experiments? And then my answer is always categorically not, because different robots are suitable for different types of studies. So of course, often you don't have the luxury to select from different types of robots for your experiments, but it means if you have a particular robot available to you that you want to work with, it might also influence the type of studies that you can do. Because of the different capabilities of the robot, not only how it perceives in general the environment, so its Umwelt, but in particular when it comes to interaction design. How can the robot interact with people and the world? So sometimes you have to build your own robot. If that's a robot we recently built, the Merli robot, specifically for child robot interaction. I just want to show you very briefly a little video about that. Okay, I just want to cut this short, but we are also using this robot at the moment in some clinical applications. So now I want to get to the main focus of my talk, which is about human-centered design or co-design. In the past few years, my team has done several projects in different application areas that I would want to illustrate. So the key concept here of design, thinking, and co-design is that it's a highly iterative process where you work with stakeholders. Stakeholders could be the envisaged primary users. It also has to be any other stakeholders around. So for example, if you work on human robot-assisted therapy for children, then the stakeholders would be not only the children, but also the parents, the carers, the family. If the application has to happen in a school, then it would also be the teachers. And anybody else who is involved, not necessarily directly in interactions with the robot, but who will form an opinion about it, an opinion about its use and usefulness. And that can also then influence whether the robot will actually be used. So you have these different stages to first empathize, to try to understand the application domain and the users. Then you come up with some, in brainstorming, some ideas on what are the particular pain points or problems that exist for the users. Then you create some ideas, build prototypes, test it, implement it, and the cycle continues because it's a process where you typically run over, well, it can take months, but typically in my projects, it takes several months or even years to go through the cycles and iterations of co-design. So the first example is the PhD project of Samira Rasuli. She graduated a couple of years ago and now works as a postdoc in my lab. So here's just another way on how to illustrate human-centered design. In general, you need to understand the context of use of a particular system. You need to specify the requirements of the users and also the organizational context. You produce or generate some solutions, you evaluate them against the requirements, and then the loop continues, as I mentioned before. So stage one is usually understanding the environment in which the system should be used, the tasks that are involved, and conduct observations. So this could be home visits, interviews, and surveys to gather insights into the real world context and its challenges. Second, it's about the requirements. So you need to think about the characteristics and needs of the users and the organization as a whole. So the physical abilities, cognitive abilities, daily routines and habits, and the social context. So for example, for a home robot, is it for a person who lives alone or with a family? What should the robot do? Is it about physical assistance? Is it about social assistance? And so on. Then stage three, to produce some designs, some prototypes. Again, you need to involve the stakeholders in the design process. You cannot not first gather input from them, then go back to your lab, develop the prototype, and then show them the final prototype. No, you have to involve them through, again, co-design sessions, where from the very first stages of the whole project, starting, by the way, with the research questions, not just the design of your particular system, but even starting with the research questions in co-design, you need to do it collaboratively with your stakeholders. So, for example, if you want to develop a robot to support older adults, then you would have to involve not only the older adults, but also formal, informal caregivers, healthcare professionals, if they live in a care home, also the care home management staff, and so on. And stage four, to evaluate it against the requirements in terms of usability testing through quantitative and qualitative feedback, using surveys, interviews, observational studies. Ideally, use all of those. The more data you have and different data you have, the more detailed and richer will the picture be, the results, your insights that you can gain from that data. And then again, you continually then improve and refine the system until it meets the usability, user experience, but also the functional goals. So an example is here from Samira's PhD, where she was interested in supporting university students in their mental well-being. So mental well-being is a big problem in many countries. So for example, in Canada, a large percentage of university students have experienced overwhelming anxiety at least once in the last 12 months. So this is really a big problem, not only in terms of people's emotional and mental well-being, but it also can have a huge impact in their social relationships or also in their university career. So regarding robots and social anxiety, there has been, in the recent few years, there has been a lot of interest in it. Reasons are that robots can be perceived as non-judgmental, as opposed to talking to a human counselor, for example. Robots can, in principle, adapt and personalize. Robots are certainly good at repetitive tasks, for example, repeatedly going through certain exercises that are beneficial for mental well-being. And robots are physically present as opposed to maybe an app on your smartphone. So we had different research questions here regarding how would university students perceive such a robot? Would they want such a robot? Would they use such a robot? And how would they feel after actually having done sessions with this robot? So the co-design phase here went through different steps. We had a conceptual phase where we first surveyed and analyzed the field in general. Then we did a study, an online study, where we wanted to know students' perceptions in general. We then also did a larger study with more than 1,000 students here at University of Waterloo. So these were online studies. We then did an intensive co-design process with 5 mental health professionals over many, many months. and iteratively developing and finalizing and refining a prototype. And then we did a small scale co-design study with university students, with 6 students, but then we did an empirical evaluation study with 50 university students. So this is just illustrating these different stages, and in particular how we did the co-design. So here the co-design was done from August 22 to later in the year in 2023. So the co-design with the mental health professionals was done both by sharing online documents, scripts, design ideas, as well as several in-person studies with each of them, where we introduced them to the robot, we asked about their opinions, and then in later meetings showed them different iterations of the prototype. So as I mentioned, this was done with 5 mental health professionals, and in total we had 17 co-design sessions with them. Each of them lasted from 1.5 to about 2 hours. We used for the actual interventions, so for the practices that students could do guided by the robot, we used the thought, feelings, behavior triangle, which is fundamental to cognitive behavioral therapy. So again, this was co-designed with the mental health professionals. They were the ones who pointed out to us to this approach and supported this approach. And with their help, we could refine it and translate it into a robot system. We also had a GUI. As you can see here, there is a tablet so that students could make certain decisions, or when we ask for their mood, you see it on the bottom right here, we could get some data from them on how they felt before the study, before the session, or after the session. We also allowed the students to customize the robot's appearances and also voices. We used the fur-hat robot for exactly this reason, because different from most robots, you can actually change the appearance of the robot, the gender, for example, the general character, the voices, and so on. So I just want to show you this video here about only a small part of the session. I don't have time to show you the whole session.
As you know, I am here to walk you through some techniques that can help with managing anxiety related to giving a speech, presentation, or verbal report. I hope you will find them helpful. Before starting the session, let's try a short relaxation technique first. Press the button when you are ready. Great, let's get started. Sit in a comfortable position. Allow your back to be straight, but not rigid. Let your arms and hands rest in a relaxed position. Close your eyes if it feels comfortable, or soften your gaze.
Okay, so I hope maybe some of you who might have followed this deep breathing exercise get an idea on how the robot would interact with participants. We had not just this one exercise, we had several of those that the students could practice during that session. So in terms of the evaluation with students, as I mentioned, we did first co-design studies with a small group of university students, and then finally with 50 university students. So we used several pre-study questionnaires, including also the readiness ruler, which is how motivated people are to maybe make changes to their routines. And we also, the post-study questionnaires, we had the usual questionnaires that people very often use in terms of how do people perceive the robot, how do they perceive the working alliance with that robot coach, how usable is the system, and how do they perceive the user experience. So we had quite a balanced spread among university students here in terms of gender, and the study took about 90 minutes. In terms of usability, we got quite high scores. So that was really encouraging for us. And also in terms of the acceptability, we got very, very good results here. The low score that you hear is in terms of the perceived anxiety during the interactions. And so we were quite happy to see that the ratings here were very low, while the other ratings in terms of perceived ease of use, enjoyment, trust, and so on were really, really high. Also, participants perceived the robotic coach as competent, warm, and inducing minimal discomfort. So we then also, in terms of their readiness to change, we found that there was an increase here after the participants did the session. And also in terms of their self-reported moods, we noticed a significant improvement when we did the pre and post analysis. User experience was again perceived very high, and we had prepared 3 relaxation techniques, but the third one was optional. So we asked participants, would you like to practice another relaxation technique? And 41 out of the 50 participants said yes, because they wanted to continue practicing with the robot. The user experience was also generally perceived as very high, and students were very positive in terms of having such a coach available at the university and then also using it. We then also, in terms of open-ended questions, we did a thematic analysis where we categorized or we identified different types of themes. As you can see here, I don't want to go into detail here, but I just want to point to some of the quotes under some of these themes and sub-themes. So one comment was, for example, with a robot, I have a feeling that it won't judge me. That's the reason I would prefer a robot. Or as some people do not feel comfortable going to another human for such kind of issues, a robot coach can be a good support for them. Or you will feel the real experience with the robot as compared to voice assistant agents and books that won't give you feedback and don't feel real. So in terms of the influence of participants' personality traits on those perceptions, we only found one positive correlation with conscientiousness, but in general, personality traits didn't seem to make such a big difference in terms of how students perceive the robot. So overall, this were some very encouraging results, and we actually, over the last 18 months, we have developed a new prototype, also using LLMs and some AI tools to make the interaction a little bit smoother and rich, which was also based on feedback from the participants in this study. But we are definitely continuing this type of research here at University of Waterloo. So the second study, I want to focus on a very different user group, namely children with disabilities, in particular speech and language disabilities. And this is the PhD work of current PhD student Su-Ming Shin in my group. So when it comes to children, here in Canada, we say children with disabilities, or in other countries, you say children with special needs. A lot of attention over the past decades, basically, have been put on ASD in particular, as well as ADHD. but there are still huge potential for other user groups. There are many types of disabilities that children could have. It could be developmental disabilities, or here in our case, we were interested in speech and language disabilities. So we have been doing actually, I think for the past 2 years, co-design with expert speech and language pathologists, or SLPs. And here again, we went through these cycles of to understand and empathize with the domain, with the envisaged users, in this case, the therapists, because we wanted to develop the robot here as a tool in the hands of the therapists. We then, analyzed the discussions and the notes we took in terms of defining a first prototype, then to again do some more brainstorming to develop a prototype and then test it. And the testing, the first testing phase was from July and August last year, but we have also done another phase of the study. So in terms of methodology, what we used here is also quite popular in HCI and HRI, namely defining personas. So the SLPs, our expert co-designers, they defined 2 different personas for us, different ages. So Sophie, 5 years old, Leo, 2.5 years old. This is the age range of children we are working with in this application domain. We were particularly interested here in the pain points, so the challenges of the children, and how this can be linked to therapy goals. So this then led to the development of a whole set of different games, so card games, virtual dice games, following direction games, story games, quiz games, as you can see here, with the variations for the younger age group and the older age group according to the personas that were designed by the SLPs. So from first, a careful observation and shadowing, as you can see here on the left, on the existing materials and props that the therapists already use in their therapy sessions. We then developed the 2 personas, and then finally having initial prototypes of the systems for the QT robot. So the robot we used here, I think I haven't mentioned it yet, was the QT robot. So this is just a list of these many, many games we developed for these 2 different age groups, but also within each game we had variations of that game. And we also developed an interface so that the therapist could actually could easily select for particular children particular games or variations of these games. It's very important. Well, we realized it was very important to keep the SLPs in charge, because they know the children very well in their therapy sessions. So these were just some illustrations of the interactions. So we had 2 groups, one where the robot was present and another one where the robot wasn't present. The videos that you saw were just an illustration to compare a session where the robot is present but not engaged in the interaction, as opposed to the robot being engaged in the interaction. So this work is basically still ongoing. As I said, we did 2 different, well, related but consecutive studies here. And key challenges were really to seamlessly integrate the robot in the clinical workflow. We did not change, or we did not intend to change anything about how the therapist would normally interact with the children. We modeled the games we developed very carefully on the games that they would actually use. Sometimes they already used digital games, or they used board games, for example, or toys. And we tried to emulate it and translate it into the way how the robot could interact in these therapy sessions. So for us, we learned a lot of lessons over the past 2 years in what it means to actually put a robot into a therapy setting without researchers present. And making the robot ready to be used without assistance by non-expert users. So again, these were SLPs, therapies, who are using the system. They don't necessarily have technical expertise. So one of the challenges was to also develop the user interfaces in a very intuitive and reliable way, and also the way how the robot can be engaged with the children and the therapists. So the third study again, is about robots as coaches. In this case, it was about a public speaking coach, and this was the MASc thesis of Delara Forgani. So public speaking is, as we all know, it's very essential in academic, industrial context. Also at universities, students are frequently asked to give presentations in class or in seminars, for example. And what is important is the repeated practice. There are, of course, workshops that students can attend in terms of where you have a human coach teaching them the presentations and giving them feedback, but in particular for students who might have a degree of public speaking anxiety, that itself might be scary. They might not sign up for such a project. So we then developed, in this case, it was the Pepper robot, listening to students giving a short presentation. And we analyzed the children, the students, they were adults, speech. So we used a particular software called Pratt, and the speech features that we analyzed were the articulation rate, the pitch variety, and also the volume of the voice. We also analyzed filler rates. So everyone I know, including myself, we use a lot of filler rates when we speak, different from when we write. So words like, yeah, okay, which is okay. People are very much used to listening to somebody using filler words. But if you use too many filler words, it can impact how your presentation is being perceived. We also wanted to investigate how much attention the students pay to the simulated audience. We just had a poster where we showed different faces of people, and we wanted to just check, is the person during the presentation all the time staring at their laptop, or do they also turn towards the audience, which is very important for skilled speakers. It's important to look at and pay attention to your audience. So Pepper was listening first to that short presentation. It used head nodding during the presentation to convey active listening. And also in order to demonstrate the robot's attentiveness to the talk, the robot would also occasionally lean forward, and its face tracking module was also set to active. So this was basically to give the robot the impression of being animated rather than standing there and not doing anything. So the robot was meant to listen as an audience member, but also then after the presentation was over, it gave feedback on the speech. These are just some ranges for these speech metrics and the feedback, how we calculated the feedback. We used a sandwich technique, which is very well known. So the robot started with making some positive remarks, then commenting on some negative aspects of the presentation, and concluding with the final expression of appreciation. So you go from positive to critical to, again, positive feedback. The robot on its tablet, the Pepper robot on its tablet also displayed some of the feedback that it has as a reinforcement, just in case a student might not have understood Pepper's speech very clearly. But the main feedback was really given during the speech. And so in the user study, again, we had different interests in terms of what are students' attitudes towards the robot. their rapport and interpersonal closeness. How do they perceive the robot? Would they want to have a robot to practice public speaking at the university? So we did this evaluation with 50 university students. We chose a kind of neutral topic, namely Canada Day and the history of Canada Day. And the robot would then give feedback after the presentation. So here you can see the, this is after we concluded that study, we also asked an expert public speaking coach to view a random selection of the videos and the feedback the robot gave in order to tell us what does the expert public speaking coach think about this system. Would it be useful? Would it be useful for students? So the study or the sessions with the students lasted about 30 minutes. We had some pre-study questionnaires, then they delivered the presentation, they received feedback from the robot, and then we had a post-study questionnaires. So in terms of the results, we got very positive, encouraging feedback regarding the acceptance and intention to use, and quite low scores in terms of the anxiety that students experienced during the session. We also saw in terms of interpersonal closeness that 70% of the participants selected some overlap or mainly overlap. So they had a good impression of the robot in terms of how close they felt connected to it. The listening behavior was also perceived as quite positive, as well as the perceived human nature, which was above average, in particular for agency, openness, and warmth as far as the robot is concerned. In terms of general perception of the robot in its role as a public speaking coach, all of the results we got here in terms of helpfulness, the feedback relevance, competence, and so on were very high. So with regards to the expert evaluation, here you find the answers in terms of the relevance as well as the content of the feedback that the robot provided, which were quite high. So we got some points of agreement of the public speaking coach with the system we developed, as you can see here on the left, which aligned with and was informed by also how these sessions are being run. But we also got some critical comments, and that's what we are working on right now in terms of how to improve the system. So, for example, in terms of pauses, pauses are not necessarily negative in a talk. It really depends on the context and not only how long the pause is. That's something that's certainly very, very critical and would require for the robot to also, in real time, basically, to be able to analyze it and also understand the context. But there are many other aspects that, based on this feedback that we are currently working on, since our studies here showed that students are generally very happy if in future they had the opportunity to practice presentations with that robots. So a key point that was often mentioned in studies that we did with the mental well-being coach, but also with the public speaking coach, is that participants said robots are non-judgmental. And that's indeed something in my previous work at University of Hertfordshire with the team and the studies we did with the Casper robot, for example. We often made that point. I mean, we already made that point 20, 25 years ago, that based on what psychologists told us about robots, that we said, well, robots are non-judgmental. There's maybe a reason why they could work very well in certain contexts. But since years have passed, I'm not sure about this anymore. I don't want to show you this video. As you have seen in actually many of my projects, I use the Furhead robot. I'm a big fan of the Furhead robot. And one of the videos that we see online is an application to suggest Furhead can be more efficient as an interviewer for recruitment. So as opposed to a human being, it could be a Furhead robot interviewing applicants. And the idea here would be the robot is non-judgmental and unbiased. And there are indeed different biases. There are conscious biases we are aware of. There are unconscious biases. And it's in particular the unconscious biases that often in recruitment and interviews influence the outcome. All of us are biased in one way or the other. It depends on how we grew up, the context, the environment we grew up, our own life experiences. But we might not always be aware of these biases. And it's certainly recommended to be conscious about these unconscious biases and to see, how could you also yourself maybe become aware of those. So going back to robots. So robots don't come with any of these biases, whether conscious or unconscious. So would they really be better interviewers? I asked this question this term. I'm also teaching a course on human-robot interaction and social robotics, where I showed the students, both undergraduate and graduate students. It's a joint class. And I asked them about the interviews. And the students are very experienced because the undergraduate students, we have a very well-known co-op program here where several terms they're spending in industry and they need to apply, they need to do interviews to get those co-op jobs. And I got some really, really interesting comments here that made me think about it. So some students said, well, if I were rejected by a robot, it would feel worse than being rejected by a human. Also, the robot doesn't indicate anything about the company. Students told me when they are being interviewed, in a way, they are also interviewing the interviewer because they want to also learn about the company, about the ethos and the culture in that company. A fur-head robot is, of course, doesn't reflect anything about a particular company. Also, who would make the decisions then about these interviews and why? What is the process? How are also, you typically get jobs not just in the in-person interview, but also by submitting material like your CV. What if these systems use, recent LLM AI tools? How can we make sure that there is no bias in how these LLMs are being trained? Because any AI tools, any machine learning, any generative AI tools are only as good as the training data. Aside from robots, AI has already been used for many years to screen CVs and so on. But I just want to encourage everyone to think a little bit more about, is it really true that robots are non-judgmental? What does it really mean? What does it mean for the design? What does it mean for the interaction? What does it mean for the use of these robots in certain application areas? And I would say whether a robot is judgmental or non-judgmental, it's not about the robots, it's about the people who use the robots, and the people who develop the robots for particular application areas. So to conclude my presentation, many challenges still remain when it comes to designing successful social robot applications, in particular in the wild, where you need to make sure these robots can operate without the presence of researchers and can operate for months or even years. We also need to consider not just the physical safety, but also the perceived safety and the opinions of people, of the users, not only the primary users, but also other stakeholders in the environment. And we need to really go out in the wild if we want to make a real impact. And it's something that over the decades of my career, I've been getting increasingly worried about, because sometimes I've been even involved in such projects. Many international projects have spent millions of euros or dollars or whatever currency you can think of, for example, supporting robots or building robots, developing robots to support children with disabilities. But where are those millions of robots that we all envisage that should be in schools and therapy centers. A lot of these studies give positive results and show robots can make an impact in schools, in therapy centers, for example. Where are those robots and what are the reasons that they are not yet there? Thank you.
Thank you, Kerstin. That was a really interesting talk. We've got time for some questions, and we've already got a few that have come through on the Zoom Q&A, so that can get us started. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question that was submitted on the Q&A from Zaniel, which says, regarding the feeling of robots being more comfortable to talk to than a person, were the participants affected by the novelty? And could that also be a factor in why they gave such high scores?
I mean, that's a very good question. We all know about the novelty effect. In terms of the sessions itself, I cannot exclude that that played a role, but in the thematic analysis that we did in order to analyze participants' opinions and reasons for their opinions, we couldn't find this. So the participants didn't highlight, oh, it was a cool, novel robot. I've never seen it. This is great. No, it was really about the nature of the interaction as such, and that they felt that the threshold of doing any such practices, whether it's mental health or public speaking, the threshold to approach or to do it with a robot is much lower than to make an appointment with a counselor, which again would be a novel person. You know, there would again be a novelty effect here, but it might be that it might make students feel uncomfortable because human beings, you know, they might be afraid, oh, if I now give a presentation in front of this person, if I do a bad job, they might think I'm a bad presenter and so on. So we didn't so again, to answer or to summarize my answer, I cannot exclude that there was a novelty effect, but it didn't show up in any of the comments that the students gave.
Okay. We've got a question from Gabriel. I noticed that most of the robots you have used have human features such as face, arms, legs. Have you tried robots with minimal human features? And if not, why? And if so, did that influence the human engagement during the interaction?
I've never been interested in using Android, so I've never been interested in using very detailed human-like appearances. But I am interested in applications where you have verbal and non-verbal interaction, more natural interaction, things that the users or the participants can relate to, that they understand. For example, pointing. If you want to use pointing, like the cutie robot in the therapy sessions, when it points to the child, you need an arm, you need a hand. If you want the robot to speak, then having a robot that looks like a dog or like Pleo the dinosaur, I don't think that would be very intuitive and very natural. So most of the robots that I'm using, they have some kind of human-like features, absolutely, that's correct. But also, I would call them minimal. The cutie robot, for example, or the pepper robot. They don't have very detailed human-like features. The fur-head robot, yes, the face, if you choose a human-like face, can be very detailed. But on the other hand, it's just a head. So I mean, in none of my projects am I interested in giving the impression that the robot is human-like or that they should relate to the robot as a human. I also have in my lab some more zoomorphic robots that look like animals, but it's very difficult in my current projects to fit them in because in all of my applications right now, the robot has to speak. So.
Yeah, I feel like I would find it odd to be, getting therapy or coaching from a robot that's shaped like a dog or a cat or a dinosaur or something.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Wow, we've had quite a few come through on the Q&A and a couple in the chat as well. There's a question here from Hilda who said, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I was curious about how robot research in general can be applied in real life settings. For example, if a student practices public speaking with a robot, do we know whether that actually helps them feel more comfortable when they're speaking in front of real people? And more generally, since we still do not see many robots in everyday society, despite a lot of research, how do you see this kind of work being implemented more widely in practice?
Yeah, I mean, with the first question, that's about generalization or transfer. So how can you transfer what you learn, whether at school or in a therapy session or in a practice session? How can you transfer it to a real life context? And that's indeed a very important question, and we are currently also working on that. What it would require is repeated interactions, and then also check with the students after several weeks. I mean, let's say you have a student who did 5 sessions with the robot, and the student thinks, oh, I think actually in these practices that I have improved given the feedback that I got. Then we could, for example, also track and ask the students, oh, in your recent presentations, like, if they had to give a presentation in class, did you feel that this feedback helped you? So yeah, I mean, we would definitely have to check this. I mean, transfer or generalization is fundamentally difficult to prove, because even if we did a long-term interaction, lots of other things would also happen.
Yeah.
Sometimes people also just improve in their presentation skills by practicing. Just by doing it again, even if they don't get any detailed feedback, but just by practice. And how do you disentangle the effect of just practicing? Or maybe over several months, a student maybe in their self-esteem and confidence improves. Not because of the robot, but because of other reasons. Maybe, something has happened in the student's life. So how do you prove that these sessions with the robot were the reason that they improved? It is a very, I mean, from a scientific point of view, it's a very important but difficult question.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there was a second part to it. It was more about, could you
yeah,
maybe?
how you see this kind of work being implemented more widely in practice.
Yeah, it's something that I would hope will happen. And I mean, okay, I could say a lot about it. What should I now say? A key point with robots in the wild is still the price tag. At the moment, robots are still luxury objects. They have a price tag of a few thousand, whatever, euros or dollars, Canadian or US, or 20,000. Some robots cost 250,000. So who can afford these robots? So even if you bring the cost down, I mean, to let's say $1,000 or $2,000, many people cannot afford to spend $2,000 on something where they are not really sure if it would be beneficial to them. So if it's a novelty, there might be some early adopters, as there always are, like smartphones, were first being used, or smart glasses, There are, of course, always, there's a group of people who are willing to spend money, but most people in many countries, they still struggle. They cannot just spend $2,000 or $5,000 on something that they don't know. They might have problems with paying their rent and getting food on the table. So I don't want to tell them, well, you need a robot to help your child or yourself. No. So the price tag is very, very important. And it's very difficult for many robots. In particular, the more versatile they are, the more technically advanced they are. I can't really see how you can bring the price tag down to a few $100, say. But yeah, we need to see. So there is a lot of challenges that is being faced, and also the design of the robots is often driven more by the technological excitement of we can design such a system, as opposed to how do we design a system for this particular application area where it might be useful. So yeah, it's a complex question.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I would like to just take one more question. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions. I'm sorry that we won't have time to get to them all. But Young Soo said, considering the human-related nature of the studies, how long does it usually take for one project to be completed?
That depends. So, for example, the project itself, like the public speaking, that was the project of a master student. Master projects here in Canada, in Waterloo, are 2 years. But the students also have to take a lot of courses, so it's not full-time research. But yes, you can do such a project. But on the other hand, the master student, in addition to the in-person study that I illustrated, also did online surveys, also did an online study. So, I mean, some of those projects can be done within a year. In the case of the mental well-being coach, due to its complexity and also the fact that we first had to do online surveys more generally, then online surveys here in Waterloo, then in-person studies, co-design, that was a PhD project, so 4 years.
Okay.
So it really ranges. In most of my projects, we have not just one study, but several studies under the same project. So it's difficult to put a number on it, how long it would take.
Yeah, sure. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today's seminar. So I would like to say a huge thank you to Professor Dautenhahn for sharing her insights into robots in therapy, education, and well-being. And thank you to the fantastic audience on Zoom and YouTube for contributing to a really interesting discussion. I'm gonna just finish up by telling you about our next seminar. This is part of an ongoing series of seminars organised by the UK-HRI topic group. And the next seminar will be on the 15th of April, where Professor Angelo Kengelosi from the University of Manchester and the Alan Turing Institute will be talking about cognitive robotics and HRI. To register for that webinar, you can use the QR code on screen, or I will be posting the registration link in the chat in just a moment. You can also find out more details about all our upcoming webinars on the UK-HRI website. Now, astute observers might notice that there's not a HRI seminar that next month. That's because next month the UK-HRI topic group are going to be running a workshop at the International Conference on Human-Robot Interaction in Edinburgh. And you can register your interest in taking part in the workshop on the UK-HRI website, and I will pop the link for that in the chat in a moment. So I'd also like to encourage you to follow the UK-HRI on LinkedIn to keep up to date with all the news and opportunities from the group, and join the Discord community if you'd like to be more actively involved. Thanks again to everyone for joining us, and I hope to see you again at our next seminar in April. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kerstin.
Bye-bye.